Hello, everybody. Once again, thank you so much for being here. We are moving on to the last panel of the day, which is going to be on architecting corporate culture for wellness, well being, and mental health. This is the third panel of the day. Tomorrow, we're going to have more panels, and we are covering a lot of ground on all things wellness, well being in the workplace. And we've had a couple of great, well, actually three conversations before in the previous three panels. So I am hoping that you are enjoying all of these conversations. If you have missed any of the panels before, don't worry, we are recording everything and it will all be available to you by next week. So for this panel, I want to welcome our moderator, Minola. Hello, Minola, how are you?
Hi, Enrique. Hi. I'm so happy to be here and to see Hacking HR people on my screen again.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking over this panel and moderating this awesome conversation around architecting corporate culture for wellness, well-being, and mental health. So I'm gonna start welcoming your panelists. I'm gonna welcome Adam. Hey, Adam, how are you? Good to see
Hey,
you.
how's it
Hi, hi,
going?
hi. Hi. I'm gonna welcome Julie and I'm gonna welcome Bridget. Hello,
Hello.
everybody. Hello,
Hello.
hello. Thank you so much for being here. I am excited about this conversation. Before kicking off, I'm going to ask you to please have your microphones muted when you are not speaking, just in case to avoid any background noise and whatnot. Um, and have fun, have a great conversation. If you need me, I'm going to be in the background, learning, listening, and making sure that it all is running smoothly. So, Minola, turning the baton over, the online baton over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Enrique. And as usual, otherwise, no pressure. So, hello, everyone, and good moment of your day on your time zone when you take the time and the curiosity to spend some time with us. As Enrique mentioned, my name is Minola. I am saying hello to you on a particularly rainy day in Basel, in Switzerland, the land of cheese and chocolate, which makes the weather a little bit more bearable. I'm a journalist by trade, a change manager by choice, and a hacking HR supporter by calling. And let's make most of our time today. Hacking HR hours always feel so very short and much shorter than regular hours. So I will just pass the e-mic around as you appear on my screen. And my first ask from you is that you give us a short introduction and you also share the perspective that you bring into our conversation today on the topic of our panel. Doing this clockwise. Adam, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Short bio for me. I have been, I guess, involved in HR for the last 20 plus years in an unofficial role with my work with Trader Joe's. Any of the California, I think there's one California person here who probably knows about Trader Joe's. I don't know where Julie's from, but yeah, it's definitely been a topic, and I think I've seen some of the burnout happen. I also come to this as somebody who's been who has has had a therapist, is in therapy for the last 3.5, almost 4 years, and my wife is a mental health professional. She's currently in her what is it now? Not her practicum, her internship for licensed professional counselor as a therapist. So it's a everyday conversation in our house of reading through all kinds of therapeutic stuff. So I think I bring a lot of that to work where it's a frequent topic of conversation.
Thank you so much, Adam. Welcome, Bridget.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. In terms of my bio, I've been in HR for 25 years. I'm aging myself. And I currently serve in the role of Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer at CalArts. In terms of my connection with this topic, I just feel it's even more prevalent now, especially now with COVID. I originally started being a COVID POC when I was at Albany State University. And here at CalArts, I'm part of the COVID committee. And I can tell you over the last 2 years, more and more people are not only facing burnout and stress, but embracing that they have emotional and mental challenges, and now are moving forward and taking some of the resources that are available. I think a recent commercial that I saw, they had someone at a gym and he had a heavy weight, and a person walked up to him and said, "Hey, I can help you." He says, "No, my family would be embarrassed. I got to hold this on my own." And I think that happens a lot in mental health. People are afraid of what others will say, and they don't get the help that they need.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Well, it turned out I ended up doing this alphabetically. So welcome, Julie.
Hello, my name is Julie Massagia. I'm the Chief People Officer for two different agencies, CMI Media Group and Compass. Both are media and advertising agencies focused in the healthcare sector. And I have been in human resources for over 15 years. My degree is in psychology, so I've always had a passion for this area. Before I moved into the HR field, I actually worked in the mental health field as well. And I'm responsible in my organizations for everything people, including employee well-being, people relations, and all of our diversity, equity, and inclusion work as well.
Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing a little bit of insights into yourselves. Now, let's dive straight in and linking the conversation back to the title of our panel, which is Architecting Corporate Culture for Wellness, Wellbeing, and Mental Health. When people hear architecture, something design, something structural work, something both. Now, when you hear architecting corporate culture, what do you think about? And Bridget, would you please kindly lead us into this conversation?
Yeah, I when I heard that term, I thought about the purpose of an architect, which is to design and build, but also to build it where it's sustainable. So when we're talking about corporate culture and mental well-being, we need to think about that as well when we're designing it, involving the stakeholders that are impacted to help us with the design to ensure not only engagement, but sustainability.
I guess this is the moment when I declare the unmuting competition officially open. So Julie and Adam, please feel free to build on each other on a free flow conversation style.
Sure, I'm happy to build on what Bridget said. I love the idea of making it sustainable. The other thing that also comes to mind for me is the role of safety in that as well. And an engineer or an architect is also responsible for making sure that they are responsible for creating an environment where everyone can feel a sense of safety. And oftentimes with construction, you think of physical safety, but in the work that we do in HR, often also thinking about psychological safety as well.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. We recently did, what was it, an invisible disabilities lecture with a lot of our staff, and that was kind of eye-opening to see. I think it was my first week with the organization, which is the Boys and Girls Club of Central Virginia, and that was like, okay, I have an opportunity here to talk about kind of my own spot in this, in my own journey, and that was like pretty eye-opening for a lot of people. And then in turn, it creates more conversations, and you can start to ask questions and involve others in that process of like, hey, we want to build some resiliency, and COVID hasn't helped. What things are you doing? And when you kind of go to somebody and ask that kind of stuff and ask for their buy-in, it's I think for your frontline workers, like in my case, they're kind of like shocked I would ask. And I'm like, well, it can't just be me building this in a vacuum. And then you get some buy-in and you get some really good ideas.
Well, there are definitely some elements in our current reality that makes the conversation about the sustainability and the feasibility and the safety and even the transparency of architecting corporate culture really special, given what we've been navigating and how we need to move forward. And if you would make a ranking of the top 2-3 elements that impact the architecture of a corporate culture today, what would that ranking look like? And Julie, I will give you the e-mic for this bit.
Sure. So, if I'm ranking some of the most important things, I'd start with our values. Values are the basis for how we behave, the cultural norms that we are comfortable to interact in. So, having that strong foundation of values, which create those guidelines for which everybody can interact. Additionally, I would say buy-in, and that means that HR is not solely responsible, nor are they able to architect this culture on their own. They have to have the buy-in of their stakeholders, and they have to be able to, my third thing is communicate what that is well. So articulating that vision for the future of what the culture of well-being looks and feels like, what does good look like, being able to get people inspired through that. Those are the three things that I would prioritize.
Thank you.
And building on what Julia said on the first component, as she mentioned, is how we do things, the culture, the norms. That creates a certain environment and expectation of how things are going to be done and whether employees are going to share with you what's happening with them. I think a second component is leadership. How do they treat employees? Because they have the most engagement with them, that if they're not treating them well, that impacts the culture and how we do things. And I think the third thing is having an environment that supports it. So building in opportunities for employees to engage with one another and support one another, but also when you have these great resources and trainings, allowing them to utilize it.
Mm.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. Coming back to the values, that was one thing that we do a lot of here is we talk about values. Like we weave, our 5 values into like our strategic plan. It's in our literature. It's stuff that we touch on every single day of like, hey, when we interact with youth, like what kind of values do we want to hold? I used to do the same thing with Trader Joe's too. We had, like 7 core values, and I would make it a point to weave one of those core values into my daily conversation. So it became like a constant talking point of like, oh, right, Adam's going to talk about XYZ. And definitely having your leadership buy-in. Like we put it in our strategic plan and we have it from the top down. Like our board has to be a part of all this process too. Like they get like the final sign off on things like the budget, but they also have, like we have a slide on DE&I, we have a slide on some of this stuff like resiliency. We have a slide on, what we've accomplished, what we want to do, how we want to better support the rest of our team, and making that like radically transparent, and putting numbers to it as well. Like, hey, we're going to spend this much money. We've budgeted XYZ dollars in our organization. This is what we're going to do with it, and having a good, solid plan for that stuff, I think it carries some weight too, and people are going to be more likely to buy in if there's some like tangible data behind it.
Well, I would love to hear your thoughts on something, because not surprisingly, barely 15 minutes into the conversation, we already alluded on the fact that architecting corporate culture is not yet another thing that HR, is expected to deliver on, build and deliver on. But who should be the architect of corporate culture? And well, Bridget, I saw you quick to unmute yourself, so I take that you volunteered to lead us into this part.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that question. We do shared governance at CalArts, so we have a faculty council, a staff council, and I periodically am invited to go to staff council. And one of the things that we were talking about was employee wellness and well-being. And out of that conversation came a task force that the staff council put together. and they had some great ideas. I partnered with them, but when I presented it to senior leadership, I let them know this was not an HR initiative. This was being led by that staff council, that well-being task force that HR happens to be a part of. But they determine what the initiatives are. And then also we're bringing in the community and the students to help with this, because we feel that a healthy community as a whole, a holistic standpoint, is really going to be the key. But because the staff is leading it, it will have greater traction because they are presenting things to other staff members and employees that are important to them and getting their buy-in.
I see enthusiastic nodding around the space.
Yeah, Bridget, I couldn't agree more. I think that it has to be led as an organization. It has to be led, in my point of view, both bottom up and top down. It can't just come from one place. And that's what I was talking about before, with getting the buy-in from your stakeholders and articulating that vision that people can lead behind, and where that vision comes from. I mean, when I look at our values as an organization, HR didn't create our values. Our values were created by our CEO, by our executive leadership team, and validated by our staff. And they're lived every day by our staff. And that's the culture that you end up seeing, is that they are making those values come to life. And if we're refocusing that culture that we're creating on employee wellness and employee well-being, it's what are the intentional things that we put into place to facilitate that buy-in. And one of the things that's been really helpful for us too are our employee resource groups as well. So we have multiple based off different diasporas, but we also have one employee resource group that's called Thrive, that's dedicated to employee well-being as well, and celebrating the differences that we all bring to the table. And those are the things that get the employee bought in to being a part of that culture, to being invested in it, and to behaving and living the values in the way that you want, in, to what Bridget was saying before, a sustainable way.
Yeah, I would agree. In taking this role in January, there was already plans kind of in place to start the ERG process. I came from the hospitality industry before that, which is well established for having employee resource groups. And so I came into this job having like 5 or 6 people who are like, hey, we want some ERG. We want this. I'm like, great, this is fantastic. Like, you form a committee, you start to lay some groundwork, and I will like advocate for you, because that's their ideas and their buy-in. But yeah, we have a full-time wellness coordinator who literally goes around to our 6 clubs and does wellness workshops and kind of goes through that with kids, because we're seeing so many young adults and kids like come to the forefront with like just anxiety over COVID and masking in school and families, and like it just makes it even worse. So I think having some of that stuff in place, both for your employees to be able to help them interact with your with the people that they're responsible for too, I think is pretty crucial.
Well, Adam, I will ask you to pace your muting just a little bit, because I've been carrying 2 mental Post-it notes with me. You mentioned co-creation very early on into the conversation, for which transparency is fundamental. That you mentioned transparency and being transparent several times. So, I picked up the teasers and now I am giving them back to you. How can we make sure that we build in transparency into this architecting corporate culture process in an organization?
That is a great question. I think we have to go back to the beginning and look at our own motivations too. Like, that's part of it. I mean, we trying to think. I'm looking at in my head, I'm looking at the meeting I had earlier today, where the leadership team went over our FY23 operating plan, which is going to go before the board at the end of May to get approved for fiscal year 23. And all of us looked at it on Friday. we spent, and there's like 6 of us in the leadership team, plus our office manager who does far more as an office manager than I've ever seen. She's amazing. But the 6 of us plus her went through this 15 slide deck that's like a high overview. And every single one of the points, we put ourselves in the 2 different places. One, as a board member, is this going to motivate me to want to be part of the organization as a board member? And 2, if this was on, I use this a lot, like if this is on the front page of the news, how would this read? And as soon as you start asking those kind of questions about things like that with transparency, you're like, oh, okay, how would that read? Would that read as good? Like whether it's from a DEI lens, whether it's from a resiliency lens, whether it's from a budget lens, all that kind of stuff. And I think you have to go back and acknowledge your own motivations and values of the org, and then realize like all of it for a nonprofit is going to be out there anyway with your 990 for the fiscals. So you might as well go all the way and begin to be transparent, like all the way through. And that's a big thing with me, because I've been in roles where I didn't have the opportunity to be transparent. So now I'm going to, whether it's like working hours, remote or hybrid, pay ranges in the job posting, like full transparency with all that stuff. There's no more hiding.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on transparency?
Well, for me, when I think about transparency, I distinguish it between disclosure. Disclosure, I'm just telling you something. Transparency requires accountability. So once I tell you, you can hold me accountable. So I think as companies, whether it be a college or a corporation or a nonprofit, we have to think about the accountability of what we say and the actions that we take, not only to the stakeholders that we serve, but with ourselves, because we got to live with us. So that's the way I distinguish between the disclosure and transparency. And I build in components that I have to say to myself, if I do X and I tell employees this, how can I show that I'm accountable for it?
Thank you, Bridget.
I can share a little bit my thoughts on transparency. I mean, I think that when I think about transparency, I do think of all the things Adam and Bridget brought to light. I also think it's about the conversations that we're all having with each other too, and how we show up in those conversations, right? So one of the things that I brought back earlier when we were talking about how you construct what the architect is responsible for is that safety that's there. And when we're creating transparency, we have to create trust with that, or else we can say whatever we want to say. And accountability definitely plays into that too, Bridget, for sure. But they have to, believe that we have good intentions. They have to believe that we're authentic and we're coming from this honest place. Because if we are just putting information out there and it's not relevant or what they need at that moment, so that's knowing our employees and what their needs are, then we're really missing the mark on transparency. So for me, it has to be that well-rounded thought process. And Adam, I love what you said. Like, we do have a choice as HR professionals, how we show up and the integrity that we have. And we may not win everything we want to do. We may not, but we do have the power to make recommendations about how we show up as well. And having the integrity, that transparency in what we're saying to our staff about how we live our values and what we want that culture to feel like. I think that that's important as well, for every HR professional on this call.
Thank you so much for sharing these thoughts. Now, in full transparency, architecture makes me think of blueprints. If we would have a creativity exercise, what would an ideal blueprint for a corporate culture targeted and focused on wellness, well-being, and mental health would look like?
I would say that I don't know that there's going to be one ideal. I think that there's components that you might see similarly, but knowing that Adam, Bridget, and myself all come from different industries too in the work that we all do, architecting that culture and the blueprints for that will have the commonalities of things like values, things like communications plans, learning plans, employee work-life balance plans. But in my point of view, and at least what I've seen work in the industries and the space that I'm in, is really making sure that whatever blueprints we create are customized to who we are at that point in time. The thing that I think is really important is culture evolves. It's not stagnant, right? So if we're architecting a blueprint for that, we need to create some agility into that blueprint so that we can meet the demands of what well-being means for our employee population at that point in time.
And adding to that, when we put together our framework, we outlined what we meant by well-being. It just wasn't physical, but it was mental, emotional, financial. So that as we came up with initiatives and things that we wanted to put in place, whether they were short term or long term, we had a focus on a framework that we would be addressing those type of things. Going back to the stakeholders that need to be involved, not just internal, but utilizing the community, utilizing the students. Think about it from that perspective. And then how do you measure what you're doing? Some of it is quantifiable, some of it is qualitative, but how do you know what you're doing is working for the community that you're serving? I think those are key components.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of that. I think you have to build in some. I'm thinking of a blueprint recently that I got to read through when I was part of a construction project on a hotel, and there was literally like a room that was designated as a ballroom, but it had multi-purpose capabilities, and I think that's huge to like have the multi-purpose stuff built in from a resiliency, from an expansion standpoint, from a lot of different things. I mean, we've started recently started back up with employee surveys, like I want to say seasonally, like spring, summer, fall, winter kind of thing, quarterly. But we also started doing parent surveys too, kind of asking for feedback on how parents think we've handled the COVID response with, you know, constantly changing mask mandates and vaccine stuff. And then we have, I don't know, 6 different school districts that we have to deal with, 4 different school districts that we have to deal with, and their various stuff around that. So I think that's been huge to get parents involved, because then there's like Bridget was saying, there's more stakeholder kind of ownership of like, hey, all right, we got this feedback from parents. Some of this we can act on, some of it we can't because we're leasing buildings from the school districts, so we're kind of stuck there, etc. But I think that it gives people a sense that we're not simply just a static organization, that we are like constantly like looking. We're not comfortable with that status quo. We're looking like future focused, future forward. What have we done that was great? What can we keep doing that will be consistently a good thing?
Well, Universe has a very ironic sense of humor, because just as we're talking about architecture and building, my upstairs neighbor started drilling. So I hope I get to ask the question while they take us a small break. So while I was reading about architecture a while back, I remember that one of the points mentioned as a key challenge was building blueprints that would be easily understandable and readable, and that people with other type of knowledge and other type of access to the information behind those blueprints would be able to make sense of. Now, how can we build corporate culture blueprint reading capability inside an organization across functions? And how can we upgrade that particular capability inside the HR function?
I'm going to go first here, because this is like literally a conversation that I just had this last week with my CFO. The phone's ringing.
Well, maybe they read some blueprints and
Maybe they did. Hang on a second. All right, there we go. It's payroll Monday too, so of course there's somebody calling about that. But my CFO and I were talking about how integrated our roles are, because payroll and hiring is our biggest expense, and we were kind of talking about how do we get people more involved in learning about finance and how learning about what's a restricted fund versus a non-restricted fund, operating expenses, that kind of stuff, things that people may not be excited to learn but still have a structural basis for the organization. And some of that is me working with her to write leadership development plans that include some little line items on that kind of stuff. And that's like a key part of like, okay, we have to work kind of across organizations, but then also kind of ask who's got what knowledge and what knowledge do you need. So there's some individual plus larger group conversations that have to happen for some of that stuff. And that's pretty cool and pretty key to be able to kind of, that's one way that HR can kind of broaden themselves and flatten out across the org.
I have found the simple conversation of explaining the why has been incredibly helpful. One of the things that I think often happens when people view HR is like, well, HR said, or HR made this rule, and they don't often understand where it comes from, how it comes to be, or why it's there either to protect them or to serve them and their rights as employees. And so what's been most empowering for employees that I found in across multiple companies is just explaining why we do things. Now, at first, when you start that approach, they're like, why are you telling me all of this? Isn't this your job? But then as they start to really understand that there's purpose behind the things that HR does in relation to, architecting a culture, transparency, the process of building a framework for something even, or a scorecard for how we measure those things, they start to gain a better appreciation, and then also they're more bought into the outcomes too. And that's what I want. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I want every person I work with just as involved in the success of our outcomes as I am. Because if that doesn't happen, then the buy-in that I talked about earlier on doesn't happen either. And we feel like as HR professionals, we are going on this uphill battle by ourselves. And it feels unsurmountable, but it's not. If we can do some of these things and lay that, again, going back to blueprints, laying the foundation. If we're building a house, we got to lay that foundation for them.
And adding to that, I mentioned that we have a staff council. So I schedule with them, and a member of HR will be at least once a month, go to one of their meetings where we will share what's going on. Right now, we are in the process of finalizing a compensation study. But throughout the process, we were attending their meetings, sharing with them what was happening, getting them their feedback. Even when it came to the documents that we will be sharing with leadership in the town halls, we got their feedback, and they gave us like, hey, this is too complicated. What you trying to hide by using all this legal lease? So they gave us feedback to help us to restructure it where the majority would understand it, right? And the other component is working with the other leadership across other departments, and setting up ongoing communication with them, sharing with them the key things that you are having happening, and asking them to partner with you. That's going to help you to build relationships, but it's also going to help them to understand the why HR is doing certain things, because they're involved. You tell them the return of investment by them being involved, what's in it for them, and educating them. And that's what we're doing right now with our supervisors. We're having one-on-one meetings to say, hey, here are your employees that may get an increase and who may not, but we're going to walk you through the letter, give you the talk points, give you a script to use, but helping them empower to have those conversations.
I thoroughly enjoy this conversation, and a new challenge. I feel that up until now, we talked about corporate culture and architecting corporate culture through an inward-looking lens. And, remembering some elements from a few projects that had some architecture elements in them. And I remember a lot of conversations, especially with the city planning committee, around, the integrity of the environment and the integrity of the cityscape, and how does that fit in the larger picture. So let's also turn to an outward and holistic looking lens. How do we make sure that we architect a corporate culture that looks at people as a whole, that looks at the environment as a whole, and balances inward and outward lenses?
I'll start it off. A little bit about my past background. Before I got in HR, I used to be a programmer, software specialist. And so even from an HR perspective, I lay things out like I'm writing a program, and I start at the end and say, okay, where do I want to end up? And then I work backwards to determine all the things that need to happen in order for me to achieve those results. So the same thing with HR, whether we are recruiting, whether we're doing a mental well-being or any other type of action or initiative, we got to start with the end in mind and then build in the framework to measure and have accountability and have all the necessary people involved. That's how I view that.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. That was like a best practice we had to, where we would tell ourselves on the management teams, like, hey, begin with the end goal in mind. Like, what do you want to have be the end part, and then decide the steps backwards looking. And you can change the order if you need to, of order of operations, etc. But the goal was to get to that point. I think part of it's like being able to figure out who your external partners are. Give you a great example is that we're doing the same thing Bridget's doing, is we're undertaking a compensation study because I have no benchmark data to go off of. And we got a huge grant to do a living wage initiative, which was wonderful, but I don't know what the rest of the other nonprofits in my town are doing. So it's like a loose coalition of other nonprofit HR and operations managers kind of talking around this subject. And trying to figure out, like, okay, these are external influences. They can provide some help. Same thing with our community partners that focus on mental health and well-being, or like there's some peaceful, like nonviolent nonprofits here in town that we partner with as well to kind of do some of that stuff for like de-escalation and like trauma-informed care. And it's like knowing who those people are in various areas that you can kind of either one, support them by like bringing them in and paying them to do a service for you, or otherwise having them be a part of your organization. I think is huge on the external influence of the community aspect that I think we're kind of like talking around, because that creates more conversations and creates more ties that bind, I guess, if you will. It's like it's still a tangible thing that happened, but the conversations that come out of that create some intangible ties that you can't quantify, but still have impact.
I agree. I couldn't have said it better in terms of starting with the end in mind. The other thing that I would focus on, especially if I'm looking at it with an external lens, is who's my industry? Who are the people who might be adjacent to my industry? Am I involved with partnerships? Do I have a solid understanding of what my industry makeup actually looks like? So, I mean, I can speak to advertising pretty fluently, as I've been in it for the majority of my career, although I've had some other experiences with other industries as well. But what I can say is that we know from being in this industry for long enough who the wellness players are. We know the things that cause burnout in this industry. We know the things that culturally, regardless of individual organization, are pervasive across the industry. And we have to take those external factors into consideration. So speaking of advertising as a whole, if you read the news, you'll likely see that there's a burnout problem in advertising. So how are we really intentional with our employees, not only internally, but externally as well? And we're speaking to our candidates, we're speaking to our alumni, we're speaking to our clients even too, around the culture that we create that is focused on employee well-being. Not only what is it, but what does that actually look and feel like to the people who experience it? Because we need to have that voice. That's a responsibility of a organization that wants to do well, that wants to change those norms across the industry to make it a better industry to work in. Because long term, you will face a talent shortage, which we all know causes a whole nother type of burnout if we don't attract people based off their needs that are focused and customized to those specific groups as well. So I do think that we should know our industry partners, we should know our competitors, we should know our adjacent industries, and we should know the associations and the colleges and the communities that we are serving and impacting.
We mentioned safety very early on in our conversation. And looking at safety from a very, actionable next step kind of perspective, people listening in and watching us and feeling inspired by all this energy and all this knowledge sharing, they want to go back and architect corporate cultures. What are the main pitfalls and watch outs that you would tell them to watch out for and keep them safe in their work?
I'll take that. I'll go first. I should say. I think as HR professionals or people that help others, one of the pitfalls is that sometimes you take on so much that you end up burning out yourself. When I was at the Citadel, I was what's called a SARC, a sexual assault response coordinator. So if a cadet or an employee experienced that, I would be the person that they spoke with. And sometimes you're hearing some really hard things. And I've also been a domestic violence person in my HR roles at other organizations. And you hear the impact to their lives and to their children. And then it comes into the workforce. You have to really step back. And even though you want to help others, you have to build in some intentional things that will help you to manage to that and know when you have reached your limit so that you can have some self-care. I think that's, at least for me, that's one of the biggest things that I have in HR, that you know so much about people's lives. And sometimes it's very emotional, and maintaining that that neutrality, even though you want to help, you have to still protect your own self-care and your own mental and emotional well-being.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. As somebody who tends to move fast and break things, I caution my own self to like, okay, take the temperature of everybody involved first before you start going for stuff. But at least have like some good measurable progress notes. But yeah, I think it really is about creating, like Bridget said, a space where like you can still be there for people, but also have resources available for them. I feel like I recommend our EAP all the time, so much that we even had extended to our part-time staff. Like the organization went all the way through and paid for that to extend that benefit to our part-time staff, knowing what's going on with COVID, and just have that exacerbated everything else in the world. So it was like, you know what, let's make sure that our part-time staff who do the majority of the work in youth development, like actually there with the kids, have that ability to be like, okay, I need a moment. I need to talk to somebody who is a legit professional, not just my HR guy. Because I can help, but at some point I reach the end of what I can physically, mentally, and emotionally and legally do. Because you don't want me to be like giving you therapeutic advice, because that's not what I'm trained for. I can find you options, but I can't give that kind of support. So I think knowing where your limits are and what you can do with the bandwidth that you have, I think is hugely important.
I would agree. I think prioritizing your mental space, and then also as an HR leader, just making sure that I am doing that for my employees as well. Sometimes, as Bridget said, your heart, and I think Adam said it too, like when you talk to employees and you see some of the things that they go through, and as much as it can be really hard to keep yourself separate from that, but you have to be a good role model for others on your team to help them be able to prioritize their own wellness too. Additionally, to what Adam was saying about the EAP, I love that. And we offer EAP to every single employee and their family members at our company as well. We also have an offering called Ginger, which is self-paced and some AI mental health resources as well. But in addition to that is just that constant. So I'm going back to communication here, is like employees, if they don't use it often, they forget about it. And then they don't think they have a place to turn. So it's actively creating these communications campaigns throughout the years, these webinars. We bring our EAP representatives into webinars for our staff, since we're still dispersed right now. And to make sure that they just know the full scope of those offerings, that it's not just 10 counseling sessions a year that they get in addition to their mental health offerings from the healthcare plans. But it's also, if you're looking for information, if you're looking for childcare support, if you're looking for rehabilitation support, there's so many different types and robust offerings. And then one other thing that I thought was really cool about EAP is that I don't think often is communicated from the HR teams to employees, but I think is super valuable from a DEI lens, is this idea that we all bring different perspectives and different situations to the well-being or wellness challenges that we're going through, whether they're physical or mental. And with an EAP, you can customize exactly what you're looking for. So making sure that there's transparency in that. If you are looking for a counseling resource that comes from the same type of perspective or background that you are bringing to the situation, you can request that in your service request as well. Those are all things that enhance that experience for the employee and make them want to use it again, rather than just thinking, oh, they say they have stuff, but I haven't really experienced it. And then their well-being is deteriorating even more. Manolo, we can't hear you.
Well, and we got the "you are on mute" best quote from the last 2 years. Thank you for calling me out, Julie. Now, I was just saying that mindful of time, and I managed to solve almost 1 minute with staying muted. It's a Dr. Seuss moment for me when I get to say, how did it get so late so soon? And it's very painful for me that we need to wrap up this conversation. Now, before the wrap up e-mic drop moments round, I would like to squeeze in one last question for you, because we mentioned a lot of elements that can be grouped under very fundamental human values like respect and compassion and self-compassion and humanity and caring for others. Now, how can we harness these values as corporate values when we architect a corporate culture? And let's do a counter clockwise round as you are on my screen. And well, Julie, that puts you in the first hot seat.
Great. So I think we started the conversation here with values and being intentional about those values. If I go back to what Bridget was saying, and I'm stealing a point from you about starting at the end, we really can make sure that those values exist within our organization. And the best way that I have found to make sure that people are internalizing those values and prioritizing those things that actually lead to wellness is to be accountable for them. So to build that into how you operate. As HR professionals, I think we have a really great opportunity to do that through our talent management structures, through our rewards and recognition structures. Granted, it involves that true partnership with your executive team, your C-suite team, and really, making sure that we hold people accountable to that. But we do have an opportunity in how we build those policies, those structures, to make sure that the values come through, especially those of treating each other with respect and giving people space to be themselves, their whole selves, when they come into work every day. And that's what opens those honest conversations up, so we can understand what those employee needs actually are and get to the place of true well-being. Because if we don't know what our employees need, we may never hit the mark for them.
Thank you. Bridget.
Building on what Julie and Adam have said previously, one of the key things is that leadership models what we expect. So one of the ways that I have found to be effective in organizations is that I add the values to their performance review. Because what's measured gets done, right? The other component of that is ensuring that they are empowered with the knowledge and the skills to do that. So maybe you have to, because especially with COVID now, they're having to engage on a whole nother level with both in-person and hybrid employees. And they're not sure how to do that. So providing training, doing skill drills with them so that they can practice having those conversations, providing some scripts that they can refer to and put it in their own words. But if you hold people accountable, you got to empower them with the knowledge to do it. But definitely included in their performance review and the training, I think, are key components.
Thank you.
All right. I think there were two really good presenters before that. I don't think there's a whole lot else I need to pile on. I like it about putting that in the performance reviews. We actually just rewrote our part-time evals and actually asked our staff for ideas on what they would like to be held accountable for, and that got them involved, and that was kind of cool. But yeah, overarching theme I think is building in that kind of resiliency and just kind of going from there and being, like I said, super transparent. I think we've all touched on that aspect too, and getting as much buy-in across multiple stakeholders as you can, and just kind of knowing who the players are. Sometimes it's more about the conversations we have rather than the work we actually do. And we kind of go from there. Like, Julie touched on the policy aspect. One of the things I try to do as well is okay, who does this policy directly affect? And what are the effects? Do I need to go talk to somebody about what that policy feels like? And oftentimes when you have that conversation, the person's like, yeah, it sucked to be on the receiving end of that policy. I'm like, okay, that's a red flag that we need to address. So then you start to make a turn and see what you can rewrite and or get rid of if it's been there for a decade and hasn't benefited anybody. Why is it in our handbook? Kind of questions.
Thank you also very much for your generosity of sharing. And just before Enrique joins us to wrap up the day, a very, very quick mic drop moment. What is your key wrap up takeaway for today for people spending some time with us? It can be one word or a very short sentence. Otherwise, no pressure. And let's do this very quickly. And Bridget, please, your key takeaway.
My key takeaway is 2 words: be human.
Be human.
Be human.
Thank you so much. Julie.
Well, Bridget, I love it. And so I'm going to take that too. Being human is definitely what this is all about. We're all different, we're all uniquely us.
Thank you so much. Adam.
Put on your own oxygen mask before you put on the oxygen mask to help others.
Thank you so very much. And Enrique, you can
Join
join
now.
us. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Minola, Adam, Julie, and Bridget for sharing all these amazing insights with me, with the Hacking Network community. This has been a great conversation. Everybody who is tuning in, thank you so much for being here for this past 4 hours of these 4 panels that we had today. I hope to see you tomorrow for the 30 panels that we are going to have starting at the same time today. So I hope you are enjoying the conversations and more importantly, ready to take action. So Minola, Adam, Julie, Bridget, thank you so much for being here. Stay safe and stay well. And I'll see everybody soon in the next event tomorrow. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day. Thank you.